Hey, Retcon Raider here. Sorry for the relative silence lately. Obviously, things have been pretty busy over the past couple of months. Between games like Disco Elysium, Stygian, and even Outer Worlds, not to mention the latest backer build for Phoenix Point, it's been difficult to find time for projects like this one. Then again, with the official launch for Phoenix Point coming up in December, I'm guessing that things are just going to get even busier from here on out. And not that I'm complaining, of course. All of these are games that I've been following for quite some time. In fact, some of them, like Phoenix Point and Stygian, are actually a big part of the reason I started this whole YouTube thing in the first place. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start things off by taking a look at the numbers, and then we'll circle back around to talk about Phoenix Point. Now, given that we're covering 2 months this time around, let's take it 1 month at a time. First up, we've obviously got September, which marked the release of both Backer Build 5 and Stygian, Reign of the Old Ones. Unsurprisingly, it was a pretty strong month, maybe even the strongest month of the year, though it's probably a safe bet to assume that December will end up being even stronger. Looking at the numbers, we ended up pulling in over 1,400 subscribers, and just over 250,000 global views throughout the month. The vast majority of these views were, of course, thanks to the newly released backer build from Snapshot Games, though we also saw a little carryover from the Wasteland 3 Alpha that we looked at back in August. Sadly, while Stygian also pulled in some pretty respectable numbers, it was pretty much entirely drowned out by the demand for more Phoenix Point content. Any other month, and Stygian probably would have taken the top slot for the month. This time around, though, it didn't even make the top 10. As for October, it was a slightly weaker month, but still much stronger than pretty much all of the summer months combined. Again, looking at the numbers, we ended up pulling in a combined total of 800 new subscribers and 155,000 global views. Unlike September, however, the views throughout October were actually spread over a much wider variety of videos. While Phoenix Point did still end up dominating the performance charts, it was closely followed by my first video about Disco Elysium. The Wasteland 3 Alpha also maintained a solid foothold on the top 10, with Stygian rounding out the bottom of the list. Again, any other time, I think it's safe to say that Stygian would have ended up dominating the monthly performance. But it just couldn't compete with games like Phoenix Point and Disco Elysium. Now, one rather interesting thing I observed throughout September and October were the overall engagement trends for each of my new ongoing series. Putting out videos about Phoenix Point and Stygian on a more regular basis makes it a little easier to see how well they're each holding my audience's attention. In the case of Phoenix Point, for example, audience retention has been pretty high. The series started off extremely strong, with my first episode pulling in a grand total of 30,000 views. There was a modest drop-off with each subsequent episode, well, ignoring episode 3 for some reason, but it managed to maintain an average of roughly 15,000 views per episode throughout the rest of the first month. It did drop off a little further to roughly 10,000 views per episode throughout October, but that's still a far cry higher than the average level of engagement that I was previously seeing with series like Battle Brothers, Darkest Dungeon, or even Pathfinder Kingmaker. Stygian, on the other hand, definitely saw a much sharper decline. While it started fairly strong, with roughly 15,000 views on episode 1, it rapidly dropped off to an average of roughly 3,000 views per episode for the rest of September. By October, it was down to roughly 1,500 views per episode. And now in November, it's not even breaking 1,000. I'll admit, the low level of engagement is definitely a cause for concern, especially given the massive volume of work that goes into those dialogue-heavy episodes. Still, given that we're already roughly halfway through the series, I'd love to see it through all the way to the end. I'll just keep watching the numbers for now. but I might have to keep my options open, just in case it gets any worse. Which, of course, brings us to Disco Elysium, the other big new release that we saw in mid-October. Now this was a game that I was pretty poorly prepared for. I'd been keeping loose tabs on it for quite some time, but the developers were notoriously tight-lipped about any significant details. When the game finally did come out, they were kind enough to send me an early review copy, but even then, I'll be the first to admit, I definitely was not ready for it. That said, Episode 1 did pull in some pretty respectable numbers. It clocked in just slightly below Stygian, racking up roughly 13,000 views. Unfortunately, while it did pique a lot of my viewers' interests, it seemed to have a really hard time gaining any real traction. It also required a truly monstrous amount of work, given that it's an almost purely dialogue-driven game. All told, I think it ended up taking me almost 5 days to finish recording and editing Episode 1, and another 3 days to finish Episode 2. It also completely wrecked my voice, pushing me off schedule for the rest of the month. Between that and some rather frustrating issues with YouTube's automated copyright system, which I won't go into here, I ended up making the executive decision to cut the series short. Now, I might still end up returning to it at some point in the future, likely with shorter episodes for the sake of both my health and sanity. But for now, I'm happy to have at least gotten a chance to introduce the game to my viewers. If you enjoy creative and well-written dialogue-driven RPGs, especially ones that aren't afraid to tackle some rather controversial subject matter, then I strongly encourage you to go check out Disco Elysium for yourself. For what it's worth, I think it's one of the best RPGs I've played in quite some time. I might even say it's my game of the year, but that's a little premature with Phoenix Point right around the corner. Anyway, that pretty much covers both September and October, aside from our brief foray back into crowdfunding, with Solasta, Crown of the Magister. I also really wanted to set aside some time for Encased, another crowdfunded RPG that officially hit early access back in October. Unfortunately, between all of my other high-priority projects, I just never got around to it. Again, that's something I might end up revisiting in the future, especially if enough of my patrons end up asking me to give it a proper look. For now, though, I'll be riding out the rest of November, focused on both Stygian and Backer Build 5. My current plan is to see if I can wrap up both series before we get to December. Well, like I said before, we're already roughly halfway through Stygian, so it's possible that we might be able to finish the campaign over the next few weeks. As for Backer Build 5, well, as much fun as I've had playing with it, I think it's pretty obvious why its days are numbered. We'll probably get to about episode 20 or so before it's officially time to pull the plug. At that point, we'll be switching over to the release build as soon as it becomes available, which of course means we'll be starting over with a brand new campaign. Now, this does bring us to a few important announcements. First of all, I think it's fair to say that Phoenix Point will almost certainly end up dominating my production schedule for pretty much all of December. Like I said, this is the game that I basically started the channel to help support. I've been at this for over 30 months now, and in that time I've made approximately 75 videos about Phoenix Point. Now that we've finally reached the finish line, it would be pretty silly of me to give it anything less than my full and undivided attention. Second, I do plan on playing through the game more than once. The developers have stated that the average campaign will take about 20 to 30 hours to complete, which breaks down to roughly 30 to 40 episodes worth of content. Given that they've also announced a rather ambitious schedule of post-launch content and DLC, that means we'll have something new to look forward to in each new campaign. On top of that, the game has at least 5 different endings, so we'll obviously be going for a different ending each time we start a new campaign. Speaking of which, the third thing I wanted to mention is that I'm actually letting my patrons decide which ending we'll be going for. I've already got a poll running over on my Patreon until November 16th, which will decide the ending we'll be going for during our very first playthrough. I'll almost certainly end up running similar polls in the future as we start up additional campaigns, though I will be limiting the options in future polls, just to prevent us from getting the same ending more than once. Which, of course, brings us to our fourth announcement, which is that I've officially started up a new waiting list for the first of our Phoenix Point campaigns. Now, technically, I actually already announced the recruitment drive over on my Patreon and on my official Discord server, just to reward the people who actually follow my day-to-day nonsense. Don't worry, though. As usual, there's plenty of room on the waiting list, and everyone is welcome to apply. That said, if you'd like to claim a slot on the waiting list, just let me know what name you'd like for your soldier, as well as any preferences you might have for things like class, appearance, and even your preferred build or loadout. Just keep in mind, the more specific your request, the harder it might be for me to actually find a suitable recruit. Oh, and no offensive name requests, okay? I already have enough issues with YouTube's content filter as it is. I really don't need my viewers trying to make it any worse. Now, I'll be sorting the list on a first-come, first-served basis. However, it is worth noting that some of my patrons will get priority placement towards the top of the list. They are the people who help keep the channel going, after all, so it's only fair. But once I've worked my way through them, I'll be drawing recruits from the rest of my viewers as usual. I can't guarantee I'll be able to get to everyone, but I'll certainly give it my best shot. And anyone who doesn't make it into campaign number 1 will be carried over into campaign number 2. Finally, announcement number 5. This one is for the folks who really don't care about Phoenix Point. Basically, I just wanted to reassure you that while it will be dominating my production schedule for a while, this is really just temporary. As the hype surrounding Phoenix Point starts to dwindle, likely in late December or early January, I will start looking at reintroducing one of my older series back into the normal rotation. I haven't really decided what series that will be, though I'll probably start with Stygian if I haven't already finished it by then. After that, though, it could be anything. Maybe one of my older series like Battle Brothers or Kingmaker. Or maybe something entirely new like Encased. Honestly, I'll probably end up letting my patrons decide. Anyway, that's about it for now, at least until we hit December. As usual, I'd like to wrap things up by thanking everyone for their support. While I do tend to single out my patrons, I think it's important to thank the rank-and-file viewers as well. After all, there wouldn't be much point in making these videos if it weren't for folks like you who actually enjoy watching them. As always, it might not seem like much, but every single like, comment, or subscription does make a tangible difference. Heck, we've picked up almost 2,000 new subscribers over the past couple of months, which has officially pushed the channel over 14,000 subscribers. And while that might not be much in the grand scheme of things, it's certainly nothing to sneeze at. Of course, it also goes without saying that I'm especially grateful towards the Raiders, the folks who are invested or loyal or just plain crazy enough to help support the channel financially. Not only do they help cover the channel's monthly overhead, but the money they donate also goes towards things like equipment, upgrades, and, of course, new games. In fact, after setting aside a fraction of their pledges over the past 2 years, I'm finally getting a new computer. My current rig has gotten me this far, but at this point, my CPU and motherboard are over 10 years old. Thanks to my patrons, I'll now have a much faster, more reliable computer, just for the purpose of making more videos. It's actual, tangible proof that their support really does make a difference. So that said, I'd like to give special thanks to pretty much all of the Raiders, both past and present, Of course, given that we don't have all day, I'll restrict the individual thanks to the raiders who were active during the months of September and October. First up, we've got the rank and file, the raiders in training. A.R. Jackson, Blake Candon, Denton EX, Eugene Foten, Gilrain Bior, Henrik Reimer, Hobotron, Ludovic, Michael Bomert, Oliver Sober, Purge, Sebastian Wagner, Victor Anouk Songs, Vuck Rules, Warren LaFrance, and Zaki. Then we've got the honorary raiders: Austin Fagan, Benjamin Gray, Bio Golem, Brad Quinn, Cecil Kane, Domen Anslovar, ICU Uwu, Kim S. Jensen, Mark Richards, Maximilian Monk, Mozzie Melton, Mr. Scar Lectures, Stepan Lovasic, Tom Edward Idland, and Yokes. Next up, we've got the veteran raiders: A Normal Joe, AdriRaven, Alois, Ash, Ben Hollingshead, Drakiith, Eoftar, Exsellsior, Forbidden One, James Trimmier, Jonathan Tanner, Laura and Mike, Leroy Nukenson, Mildly Nuclear, Nod Goblin Nico, Sir Skelibate, The Cursed Typewriter, Valinrook, and Woe77. And finally, special mention to Revenant and Mike Spark, my Raider Lord and Captain respectively. Those two are the only ones crazy enough to keep supporting my nonsense at the two highest tiers. I may not understand it, but I'll certainly always appreciate it. Now, if you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts in the description below. This is still a pretty small channel, so I can't really afford much in the way of rewards just yet. But patrons do enjoy things like special shoutouts, regular access to my unhinged ramblings, preferential placement on my waiting lists, and the ability to actually influence future content. For example, this month, my patrons are deciding which ending we'll be going for in our first full playthrough of Phoenix Point. Next time, they'll be voting on which of my currently paused series will be returning to my production schedule. Anyway, you get the idea. Donations and pledges are appreciated, but they're certainly not expected. Honestly, the most important thing is that you're still watching and hopefully enjoying my new content. And hey, even if you're not, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I try to take everyone's feedback into account, even the negative. That said, this is Retcon Raider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, if you need to contact me for any reason, just leave a comment on any of my videos. Or you can reach me through my Facebook page, my Patreon account, my Twitter feed, or my official email address. As always, links are in the description.